She yelled at me like I was some stranger, not her mother, not the woman who had given up her entire life to raise her, care for her, love her, but a person she couldn't wait another second to throw out of her house, all because of a vase, a porcelain vase. At that moment, I knew it wasn't just the vase that shattered on the floor. It was the trust of a mother that broke with it. You know, life has a cruel way of showing you who truly values you and who only values what you bring. This isn't a story about a vase. It's a story about silence that lasted too long, about love that came with conditions, and about the moment when I had to finally speak the truth, not to seek revenge, but to reclaim myself. If you're watching this video, thank you. And if you've ever felt hurt, cast aside, or betrayed by the very people you loved the most, then this story is for you. Please consider subscribing to this channel if you believe that every person, especially those who've stayed silent for too long, deserves to be heard. And don't hesitate to leave a comment if you've ever had to fight for your own truth. Let's begin. My name is Helen. I'm 68 years old, and for the longest time, I truly believed I had fulfilled every duty a mother could have, and even more as a grandmother. I once worked 2 jobs, not for my own survival, but to give my daughter, Emily, the life I could only dream of when I was young. I never bought myself new dresses. I ate cheap meals, drank watered-down coffee, but I never hesitated to buy books for Emily, never flinched when she wanted piano lessons, ballet classes, or to attend an expensive private school in Oregon. My husband, Thomas, passed away early. Emily was only 10, and I made a promise to myself that day. No matter what happened, she would never feel the absence of love. I would be both mother and father. And I kept that promise. I may not have been a perfect mum, but I never gave up. I never walked away, even when she slammed the bedroom door, even when she moved out without a word. But that day, when the vase crashed onto the hardwood floor, Emily looked at me, as if I was someone she'd never met. I can accept exhaustion. I can accept being forgotten. I can even endure the occasional careless words. But the way she told me to pack up my things and leave her house, the very house I helped pay for, the house I helped decorate piece by piece, it knocked the breath out of me. I stood there under the fading Seattle sunlight, my hands trembling, my chest so tight I couldn't speak. I don't blame the vase. Truly, I don't. The vase was just an excuse to push me out of a life I once was the center of, but had now become a burden to. And if you're wondering if I cried, no, I didn't. Because when tears are no longer enough to ease the pain, that's when you understand what silence really feels like. But you know what? I had been silent for far too long. And in that silence, I discovered a truth that even Emily didn't see coming. A truth powerful enough to change everything. But I didn't speak it out of spite. I spoke it because I needed to live again, as myself. That's when I realized truth doesn't need to be screamed. It just needs to be spoken at the right moment. And that moment is now. I used to live in a small town called Redmond, just outside of Seattle. A peaceful place, full of maple trees and bright red leaves in the fall. I loved it, not because it was exciting, but because it felt like a little nest I had quietly built over 3 decades of my life. Emily grew up in that home, a small 2-story house with a gray tiled roof and a front porch where I planted lavender and white daisies by hand. Neighbors used to say that even as a single mother, I had created a real home. Emily was a good child, smart and a little sensitive. She often asked deep questions like, "Are you happy, Mom?" Or, "If Dad were still alive, would you have loved someone else?" Those questions kept me awake at night. I never taught her to be strong with fancy words. I just lived my life, hoping she would learn from my quiet resilience. When she went to college, Emily chose a prestigious school in Oregon. I was proud, but also scared. I knew I'd have to get used to the silence. No more footsteps running down the stairs, No more piano melodies in the evenings. She excelled, graduated with a master's degree in interior design. She started working in Portland and gradually built up a reputation. I was proud. Even though the calls became less frequent and the visits fewer, I kept reminding myself, she's busy. That's what being a mother means, understanding that. When Emily got married, I didn't object, even though I had concerns. Her husband, Michael, was educated, but his eyes always had a cold, calculating look. Something felt off, but I didn't say anything. Part of me feared I was wrong, and part of me didn't want to be the interfering mom. After the wedding, they moved to Seattle and bought a bigger house. Emily asked me to move in to help when their first child arrived. I initially said no. I didn't want to be a burden, but she insisted, saying, "Mom, you're the only one I trust to care for the baby." I gave in, so I moved in. I didn't bring much, just a few clothes, an old photo frame of Thomas and me, and a notebook filled with life lessons I'd collected over the years. I stayed in a small room at the back of the house. Every morning, I made coffee for the family. Every night, I read bedtime stories to my granddaughter. Life seemed peaceful, but slowly, I realized I was no longer family. I was the unpaid housekeeper, the one who got corrected for washing dishes the wrong way, the one whose words were ignored if they didn't please others. Emily stopped calling me Mom when she hugged me. She called me Mom Helen, as if to keep things polite but distant. Michael was always busy, rarely making eye contact. Conversations with my daughter became shorter, like every word needed to be measured. I used to think maybe I was just being too sensitive. Maybe I expected too much. But then one night, I overheard them arguing in the living room. Michael shouted, "She's been here too long." "This isn't a nursing home." Emily stayed silent, and that silence hurt more than 100 harsh words. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat alone in the garden under the moonlight, staring at the window to my daughter's room, still lit. I wondered, was I truly a burden now? I said nothing. The next morning, I still made coffee, still packed lunch for my granddaughter. But inside, I was quietly falling apart until the day the vase broke. It was a normal afternoon. I was dusting the shelves when my sleeve caught the corner of the cabinet. The porcelain vase, an antique that Michael once bragged cost over $10,000, fell and shattered. The crash echoed through the house. Then came the footsteps, the angry voice, the accusations. And Emily's eyes. They weren't the eyes of my daughter anymore. They belonged to someone else. I quietly knelt down to pick up the shards, my hands trembling. But I knew the one thing that truly shattered was the bond I had spent a lifetime protecting. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I locked myself in my room, sitting for hours in silence. My mind played a reel of memories. Every meal, every fever I nursed Emily through, the time I ran nearly 2 miles in the rain to buy her favorite ice cream. Now, it all felt like a distant luxury. The next morning, I apologized, even though I knew it wasn't my fault. I was used to living for others, used to shrinking myself. Emily didn't look me in the eye. She just said, "We think it's best if you go home." Home? I had no home. I'd sold my house in Redmond to help pay for this one. I'd transferred all my remaining savings into an account under Emily's name for her future security. I thought that was love. But now I realize it was giving up everything, including my right to exist. When I asked, "Are you sure?" Emily turned away. Michael was the one who escorted me to the door. He didn't say a word, just opened it and waited, like I was some unwelcome guest. I held my small bag and stepped outside. It was cold. The wind whipped through my graying hair. Behind me, the door slammed shut. Hard, final, like the closing line of a lifetime of motherhood. I stood there for a long time, unsure where to go. I didn't want to call friends. I felt ashamed. Not because I was kicked out, but because I was no longer considered family, no longer important. I sat at a bus stop across the street. It started to drizzle. I had no coat. Each raindrop touched my skin like ice, but I didn't cry. I simply looked up at the sky and whispered, "If you can hear me, Thomas, please give me a reason not to fall apart." Just then, an elderly woman sat beside me. She said nothing, just handed me a tissue. Not because I was crying, but because my face was soaked with rain. I turned to her and smiled. She looked at me and said, "I don't know what happened, but I was once kicked out of my home too, by my daughter." Her words struck like lightning, but also lit a spark in my darkness. I realized I wasn't alone. And from that moment on, I began to think differently. I started asking, why must I stay silent? Why is it that after a lifetime of giving, no one ever asks what I need? I had been a mother, a wife, an unpaid maid, a silent housewife. But now, I would learn to become myself. I left that bus stop with nowhere to go, but I knew I had to start over, not out of anger, but because I deserved to live as someone of value, not as an old piece of furniture in a house once called family. That fateful afternoon, I just intended to do a bit of tidying before dinner. The living room was so spotless, it almost felt wrong to touch anything. I was dusting the cabinet, carefully, gently, as if I might disturb the silence that had taken over the house. But all it took was one small movement, one accidental brush of my sleeve, and the antique porcelain vase slipped off the edge. I swear I could hear time freeze just before the crash rang out, sharp and brutal, slapping me like an icy hand. The vase, the one Michael had bragged about buying at an auction in New York for over $10,000, was now a scatter of glittering shards at my feet. I couldn't speak. My limbs trembled. My throat was dry. Footsteps thundered down the stairs, fast, heavy. Then the door flung open. Michael stood there, his eyes slicing through me. "What the hell did you do?" I didn't answer. I stood frozen. Emily appeared behind him, her face tight with tension. She looked at the floor, then at me, confusion and disappointment flickering across her face. "Mom!" Just that one word, but it felt like a knife to the chest. I tried to speak, but my voice failed me. "That vase was a collector's item," Michael barked. "How many times have we told you, don't touch the decorations? Why don't you listen?" I bent down to gather the pieces, my hands shaking, bleeding, but I didn't feel pain. Emily didn't come over. She didn't help. She didn't kneel beside me like she did when she was little and fell down. In that moment, I wasn't her mother. I was an inconvenient maid. That evening, I ate alone in my room. Through the cracked kitchen door, I heard their whispers. Even though they tried to keep their voices low, I could make out the words: burden, out of control, old woman, each one cut deeper. While I was washing the dishes, Emily walked in, her face unreadable. "Mom," she said, not looking me in the eye, "I think it's best if you go back to Redmond for a while. We need some space." I stood there, stunned. "What? What did you say?" I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're here because of love, but now you can see things are tense." I heard her clearly, but my heart refused to believe it. I had sacrificed everything, my youth, my dreams, my silver hair, for her. I had sold the home Thomas and I built with our bare hands to help them buy their new house, all for Emily, and now I was being shown the door like an unwanted guest. The next day, they had a small suitcase ready for me. Emily walked me to the door. No hug, no tears. Michael stood with his arms crossed. I stepped outside, holding my bag, walking down the steps like I was leaving my own life behind. They didn't look back. The door shut behind me. Not a goodbye, not even a glance. I caught a bus to a small motel on the edge of town. That night, I sat in a damp little room, resting my head on my purse, and, for the first time in years, I allowed myself to cry like a child. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know where to begin. But I knew I couldn't go on like this, in a house that no longer had space for me, among people who no longer saw me as family. And just when I thought everything had ended, another thought flashed through my mind. I won't let my life end with a suitcase and a closed door. I used to be Helen, the woman who could survive any storm. Now it was time to find her again. I didn't go back to Redmond. Instead, I chose a completely different place, a tiny coastal town in Northern California called Mendocino. No one there knew me. No one cared who I used to be. But there were waves that whispered against the cliffs, pine trees creaking gently in the morning wind, and a little upstairs room facing the sea, just enough for someone trying to start over. I rented the second floor of an old white house where the wooden staircase groaned under every step. The owner, an 82-year-old woman named Margaret, had hair like silver mist and a voice like wind through a chimney. The first time she saw me dragging my suitcase up the steps, she just said, "You don't need to explain. People come here for silence and to come back to life." I lived on a modest pension and a small stash of savings I'd kept secret, never told anyone about it. Each day, I slowly learned how to live again. I'd walk the shoreline every afternoon, collecting seashells like I was piecing back fragments of myself. I took up painting, something I loved in my youth, but gave up because I thought I had to be responsible. In the mornings, I wrote. Memories, old wounds, quiet thoughts I'd buried for decades. I didn't write to publish. I wrote to understand, to forgive. I joined a group of older women who did recycled crafts together. One had left her husband after 45 years of marriage. Another had been abandoned in a nursing home by her kids and escaped. And then there was me, the woman who dropped a porcelain vase and lost her place in the world. No one asked about the past, but everyone listened when someone spoke. There, I learned you didn't have to shout to be seen. I learned to stop blaming others or myself. One day, Margaret placed an old envelope in front of me. "I've got a little house on the hill," she said. "I don't use it anymore. If you want to stay, it's yours." I was speechless. For the first time in years, someone gave me something without expecting it back. I moved into that tiny house. It had a white picket fence, a lavender bush by the window, and a room I turned into a writing nook. I submitted an essay to a national writing contest for seniors and unexpectedly received an honorable mention. After that, I was invited to write a monthly column about aging, not the usual gardening tips, but honest, raw human stories. I didn't write about resentment. I wrote about survival, about how a woman, after losing everything, could find herself again at 68. Then one day, a postcard arrived. It was from Emily. Just one sentence. "I hope you're okay. If you can forgive me, I'd like to see you." I sat with that card for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just felt it. Some wounds don't need healing. They just need to be acknowledged. I haven't decided what to write back, but I know this. I'm no longer the woman who left that house in silence. I'm Helen. I came back to life, quietly, unexpectedly, and I will keep writing my story with these hands, with this heart, with everything that remains and all that's still to come. Every story has a turning point. Mine came quietly, but unmistakably. It was the following fall when I received a letter from the lawyer who had once handled my daughter's property documents. He was also an old friend of my late husband. He had read my column and said something about it didn't sit right with him. He asked to meet. We sat in a small roadside cafe, leaves rustling from the red maples outside. I remember clutching my hot tea with both hands, steadying myself. "There's something I think you should take a look at," he said, laying down a packet of papers. It was a copy of the property transfer agreement I had supposedly signed 2 years ago, during a rushed meeting labeled as a caregiving authorization. I read the document slowly, then stopped at a signature. It wasn't mine. The lawyer confirmed it. The signature had been forged. The property had never been lawfully transferred, which meant I was still a legal co-owner of the house. I went home to my rented little cottage and didn't sleep for days. Not because I was angry, but because something inside me had woken up. Something I thought had died. I hired a new attorney, this time a sharp, compassionate woman named Carla, who had represented single mothers in property disputes. She listened to me with stillness. No interruptions, just understanding. When I finished, she said, "We won't retaliate. We'll do this by the book, and you will be respected." The legal battle lasted 11 months. I told no one. I still woke up early, painted, wrote, joined my community groups, watered my lavender. On the outside, I was the same, but inside me a fire had been reignited. On the final day in court, I wore a long grey coat, my hair neatly pinned. Across the room stood Emily, my daughter, once the center of my world, now unable to meet my gaze. Evidence was presented. The signature compared. The cracks in their deception began to show. The ruling came. I was still a co-owner. My eviction had been unlawful, and the forgery would be investigated further. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I simply nodded, thanked the judge, and walked out, with my spine straight and my heart unshackled. Outside, a gentle rain fell. I lifted my face to the sky, arms open, not because I'd won a lawsuit, but because I had reclaimed something far greater, myself. Life wouldn't return to what it was, but for the first time in years, I had a choice, and I chose peace, even if it cost me everything to earn it. After the trial, I didn't return to my old house. Even though the ruling was in my favor, I didn't feel the need to go back, just to prove something. I wanted to start fresh, not on ground already soaked in pain, but somewhere I chose for myself. I used the reclaimed asset to buy a small house in the Oregon suburbs, a quiet place by a lake, where the maple trees blaze gold every fall. I planted lavender in the front yard and adopted a cat named Lucy. She loves curling up on my lap while I sip tea in the mornings. I wake up early each day. I write, not to complain, but to document what I've lived through. I write for women like me who once thought sacrifice was our destiny, that if we stayed silent long enough, we'd eventually be loved more. I write for mothers hurt by their own children, to show them you can begin again, no matter your age, no matter how long it takes, as long as you never give up on yourself. I didn't cut Emily out completely. I sent her a letter, not to blame, but to say, "I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I choose to keep what's left of my heart intact, so I can keep living, without bitterness." She hasn't replied, but I'm not waiting. Forgiveness doesn't need an answer. It only needs a heart strong enough to offer it. I started teaching writing at a local community center, where older folks come after retirement, divorce, or loss, searching for pieces of themselves. We sit in a circle, sharing fragments of memory we thought were long forgotten, and from there, we write ourselves back together, word by honest word. Every evening, I walk by the lake, just as the sun dips below the horizon and paints the world orange. That's when I feel still. No more anger, no more blame. Just gratitude that I didn't let myself drown in resentment. Once, while watching the sunset, an older woman approached me and whispered, "Your story." I read it. It helped me leave a 35-year marriage I never had the courage to question. I smiled. There was nothing more to say. We just stood there, quiet, watching the sun vanish behind the trees. I realized then I no longer needed to prove anything. Life had returned me to myself, whole, calm, and beautiful, as if I had never been broken. And I want you, the one listening to this story, to know this. You don't have to wait for someone else to hand you peace. You can create it, right now. Because the best revenge is living well. And the greatest forgiveness is learning to love yourself. If you've listened this far, chances are you've carried a wound too. maybe from a careless word, a long silence, or from someone you once trusted with everything. And if that's true, I want you to know you are not alone. I used to think, maybe I'm the only one who's been treated like this. But then I began to share my story, and I realized there are hundreds, thousands of people quietly living through the same kind of pain. All they need is for someone to speak up first. Someone to say, yes, I was hurt, but I refuse to let it define me. So if you've ever been pushed out of a life you helped build, if you've ever given your all to loved ones only to be forgotten or treated cruelly in return, share your story. Don't carry it alone. Let your story become a light for someone else lost in the same darkness. I invite you to leave a comment below. Tell me one thing you've kept hidden, but are ready to let go of today. Just one sentence, one small piece. I'll read it. I'll listen. And if my story made you feel seen, or healed you even a little, or just let you breathe a bit easier, please subscribe to the channel. Not just to support me, but to help build a community where everyone has the right to be heard, believed, and to start again. Because I believe this, every kind voice holds power. Every honest story is a bridge between two lonely hearts. None of us are perfect, but every step you take, every time you stand back up after breaking, it's a story worth telling. And if no one has told you this today, then let me be the first. You are worthy of love, of respect, and of a life where you never have to ask for permission just to be yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. Keep writing your own, with courage and with love for who you are becoming. We'll meet again. In the place where honest stories are cherished, please subscribe to the channel. And if you've been silent for too long, let your words rise today. And one last thing. If you still live with your parents or grandparents, hug them tightly tonight. Don't wait until you're sitting in front of a broken vase to realize some things, once lost, can never be whole again. If you're someone's child, say thank you. If you're a parent, don't be afraid to say you're hurting, because truth, not silence, is what heals broken relationships. Don't let stories like mine become your reality. Make your home a place where every wound can be healed through love, not punishment or anger. And if you're still searching for a place to call home, remember this: home isn't a place without pain. It's a place where you can forgive and be forgiven. Don't be afraid to share your story in the comments, because maybe, just maybe, what you say today will unlock a door someone has kept shut for years.